Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Evolving Role of DevOps webinar and Best Practices Guide. My name is Ryan Spilkin, and I'll be your host for the day. But you're not here for me. You're here to talk to these gentlemen, so I'd like to introduce them one at a time. First, we've got Martin Eloinger, Vice President of Cloud Engineering at SmartBear. Martin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
A pleasure. Matt, you have, Martin, sorry, you have been working in the DevOps world for over 20 years. Wow.
Yeah, I've been around.
Here and there. So you are the leader of the global DevOps team at SmartBear, and you keep all the software as a service products up and running. What's your team motto?
Oh, it's never to be the roadblock. That's what we say.
Ah, it's nice, nice, nice. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really look forward to hearing what you have to say. Next, from Dublin, Ireland, Colm Doyle, the EMEA lead of developer relations at Slack. Colm, welcome.
Happy to be here.
Wonderful to see you, sir. So you invented the brush noise that Slack people hear when they get notifications, right?
That's me. Yeah, my claim to fame.
No. But yeah, you helped the Slack team develop more pleasant and productive ways to work. And now, in your bio, it says that you enjoy civic technology products. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I have two kids, and I've gone on parental leave for both of them. But instead of being a responsible parent and using that time to parent, I usually end up building skunkworks projects. Parental leave, exactly. My wife loves it. So building stuff like helping citizens get in touch with their local reps and that kind of stuff. The state of civic tech in Dublin is not what it could be, but I'm doing my piece to fix that as best I can.
And your efforts are appreciated, I am certain. And whenever you get a chance to come over and help America out, you'd be most welcome. And finally, the legend himself, Mr. Matt Saunders, the head of DevOps at Adaptavist. Matt, welcome.
Hello, Ryan. Hello, guys. Thanks for having me here.
Matt, you've been doing this DevOps thing for a while now, too. How long have you been at the game?
Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, do we want to compare it with Martin's 20 years? Who knows? It's It was called something else back then, wasn't it? But quite a long time trying to get basically people to get to work together properly. And yeah, got all the grey hairs. I had to shave my beard extra short yesterday to get rid of some of the grey hairs from doing that. But yeah, probably about the same amount of time as Martin doing that sort of stuff.
Ah, wonderful, wonderful. And I have the great pleasure of working with Matt on a regular basis, so I know a little bit. And one of the things that you like to focus on is de-stressing the work environment, psychological safety. Can you tell us a little bit about why that's so important to you?
Yeah, so it sounds like a very kind of non-technical thing and not really an organizational thing. But once you start seeing these little problems, you start seeing them all the time. And it's all those little things that people have to do in their jobs that maybe they aren't confident enough to do because part of the organization is suggesting it's not the right thing to do. And I'm seeing that a lot in the work I'm doing at the moment, which is getting out into teams and working out why they're not working well and why they're not functioning. And a lot of the time it's because people don't feel safe or confident in what they're being asked to do. Not because they're in charge of a nuclear missile and they're being asked to press the button, but maybe they're being measured wrong or motivated incorrectly, or they have to talk to people who are incentivized in different ways. And it's stressful and it's difficult. So yeah, it's a particular bugbear of mine and something that I hope I'm helping people to fix.
Awesome. Well, guys, so I've got a list of questions that we're gonna go through, and hopefully we'll just engage in some conversations. And then after those, we're gonna open up the floor to questions that are coming in from our audience, whom we are so grateful to see today. If you are in the audience and you have a question, please enter it into the chat window. Myself or the illustrious Hugh Davey will take that question and put it on the list for the panelists when we get to the question and answer section. We do want to hear what you have to say, and we will try to follow up on every question that we can. All right, gents, let's do this. And I'd like to start by asking your opinion about how organizations and the technology that supports them are adapting to help the business change with all the impacts of the current situation. I don't even need to say it. You all know what I'm talking. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. So how are businesses adapting? How are teams adapting in real time to help the businesses change?
Well, I'll start that off if you want. So we're doing more things like this, aren't we? Although I have to start that with a caveat of we. I think we're in a pretty privileged position where a lot of what we do is what you could term knowledge work. It doesn't necessarily mean that people have to be at a specific place at a specific time, and so we're quite lucky in that we don't have to worry about those sort of logistical things. A lot of people are benefiting from it because we're not having to commute. Yeah, we've got extra time in the day, and for a lot of people, working in their own environment is a really good thing. You're not constrained by noise in the office or the commute or any of the other logistical things. But for a lot of people, actually, that's a little bit difficult. Maybe people are working at home with kids, with other responsibilities. And so what we're seeing in organizations is an interesting thing where people have suddenly got a whole load more autonomy than maybe they had in terms of where they are, where they're working from. And there's interesting repercussions from that, where, for example, people aren't necessarily able to be monitored to the extent that they were before, if you're in such a culture where that is a thing that needs to be done. And on the flip side, people need some help to get their job done, which previously they didn't have to. Things like, have people got the right equipment in their houses? Have people got space in their houses or their flats or their apartments to do good work? So what I've been seeing from what Adaptavists have been doing and from talking to our customers, it's got a very heavy focus on, again, you mentioned it earlier, the safety of people, giving them environments where they can work. I was going to say uninterrupted, but sometimes interruptions are the right thing, but work efficiently and effectively. And that's manifesting itself in all sorts of ways. I'll leave that there for now in case anybody else wants to jump in.
No, I
agree. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think you're right, particularly those of us who work in technology and primarily technology-based companies. I won't say it hasn't been a large shift. It for sure has for even for technology companies, but we're definitely better equipped for this style of working, particularly people in software, the software, development wings of companies like that. I mean, some people have been clamoring for this for a long time. I don't think I've been one of them, but not massive global pandemics, obviously, but sure there's some people who've been clamoring for that, but I don't want that. Yeah. So it's a unique position, and like you say, it's forced a lot of autonomy on people. And I think so. Like I'm a manager, and like I think a lot of what we've been emphasizing to managers at Slack is that like people want this. You have to give people plenty of autonomy, but there does come an extra level of support with that. Not monitoring, but like some people aren't comfortable with that level of support. Some people need an office infrastructure around them. And that's been a struggle for a lot of people, at Slack and other places, for sure.
Some people aren't even comfortable with that level of autonomy as well. It's really interesting. And I mean, it's a social science experiment to an extent of how people can react, and how I'm similar to you, Colin, where I like the ability to work remote and find. But I find that there's a balance between wanting to be remote and wanting to be not necessarily able to go up and walk up to people's desks to interrupt them, but just being part of the vibe of the company, whatever that might stand for. And yeah, really missing that. But it's interesting seeing how companies are responding to that. Things like Zoom sessions that people do, bring your own party hat, or have drinks at 4 p.m. over Zoom, that sort of stuff. Which again, it sounds again very kind of not really the work, but I think a lot of the effort that companies are going towards is around replicating that environment where people are able to converse with each other, not just in a very formal way.
I agree. I mean, for us, the same, right? I get to lead and manage people, and I feel like, we used to have a weekly stand up with my direct reports. I feel like now it's almost on a daily basis. You need to be able to check in on everybody, and it's not even just about the work most of the time. A lot of times it's just make sure to check in that they're okay. The work's going to get done. I think, especially in the software industry, most people can work remotely, can be alone at times, but it's just definitely checking in. I mean, for me, I know I prefer an office environment. I always have. I've worked from home every so often, but working from home and 3 kids also on Zoom and in classes can become very difficult. And then the first thing I realized is I don't have a desk. Well, my kids took my desk, so I ended up in the dining room for a week until I figured out and got some equipment, and now I'm in the living room.
Of course, the children always commandeer your things. I have to fight them back all the time.
Amazing.
But
I'll add something to that though, which is that I feel there's a growing acceptance of the fact that people have personal lives out there. I mean, we may all have seen that video of the guy who was on BBC News, and he's talking about some sort of international affairs thing, and suddenly there's some kids at the door rolling in on a wheelie thing, and he does a terrible job of covering up the fact and trying to be professional. That stuff's okay now, and I think it gets us closer to who our employees are, the people who we work for are as humans, and I don't want some automaton, some droids coming in just churning out stuff day in day out. I want a human, and I think making that stuff more visible and more acceptable has been one of the odd side effects of this pandemic. There is, of course, there is a harder side there, which is that actually, yeah, for a lot of people it is hard to work at home, and are people still managing to get their best work done? And I feel there is a great sense of loss from not having that office environment. And that's a tricky one.
I just know that for my colleagues in Adaptavist, that losing access to the coffee machine was a pretty heavy blow. But I say that as a joke. But what I'd like to ask you guys is not about coffee. It's about what you saw immediately after the switch was flipped and we had to go remote. What are the implications to sudden remote working for development and engineering teams?
I think certainly for a Slack side is that we've always thought that a tool like Slack is inevitable. We'd like to think it'll be us, but something Slack-ish is inevitable. And Stuart, our CEO, he always used to talk about that in like a multi-year time frame. He was like, in 10 years, everyone's going to be using something, so Slack or something somewhere. And this was just gas on the fire. It just pulled all of the timelines back super quickly, like all of our graphs. Stuart did this big tweet storm one night, and like he shared a couple of metrics, and it was just like all of our growth charts just went like boom, off the chart of people adapting tools like Slack. I think in terms of its impact on software teams, I know certainly it's created a lot more discipline. Slack, the company itself, was already pretty well positioned for this kind of thing because we obviously know how Slack works, and we use Slack a lot. But even then, like, humans are still humans, and conversations happen in hallways, and decisions get made in meeting rooms, and it's not like a malicious thing, or like your coworkers just being difficult. It's just human nature, it happens. But like with everyone distributed now, we are much more better about inclusive communication. Like decisions happen in Slack channels, so everyone can follow along with them. They get recorded somewhere. You know, it's not a case of like someone spins up 15 Jira tickets and puts them in a pile. It's like, you know, you can see the whole root of the conversation. Especially for kind of larger software companies that are spread around a bit. So Slack has offices, I think, in 13 countries, I want to say. And there, you know, like any company, there was a lot of, you know, head office and other offices, you know, or a lot of kind of, you know, West Coast of the US type biases. And those just don't happen now. It just doesn't happen now because everyone can see it. It's all happening in Slack. And like I said, we were already pretty disciplined about that, but it's just kind of dialed it up to 11. And then just in general, is like the tooling has become more important. So whether that's Slack or Zoom, or you know, being more disciplined about your use of Jira and that kind of thing. Certainly in my team, we talked about like we started more actively planning out our work in a much more, you know, like we were more disciplined about sprints, because, you know, obviously sprints are good and everyone does them, and you know, every company has their own little way of following them. But like a lot of the being disciplined about sprint planning was more about like the emotional energy of all of this is quite draining. So this logic of like Steve Jobs is famous for it, Barack Obama, Mark Zuckerberg, always wearing the same thing every day because there's just one less decision they need to make every day. So we got more disciplined about sprint planning because it was like, you know what, I don't want to have to, some mornings I just wake up and I just don't have the energy to think about what I'm going to do. So being more disciplined about sprint planning was just like, just take it off the backlog and just do it, and then move on and do it. And then you'll eventually build up that emotion, you know, that energy to start thinking of more creative work.
Do you think that ties in, Colin, to a workforce that's distributed around time zones? And the fact that nobody's commuting anymore means that there's not like there's less of a natural gravitation to like a 9 to 5 job, and maybe that's something that's been going on for a number of years and has been accelerated as well as the tool outcomes. Sorry, I just asked the question. Sorry, I'm asking questions, Ryan. I'm doing your job.
I can't believe this, Matt. No worries, no worries. Martin, did you had start something going right at the beginning of that last question?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I think the old way of doing things is completely gone. I mean, we're all adjusting. I mean, for example, I mean, I have a distributed team and they're in different time zones and around the world. But even for them, they've had to reach out to me like, listen, I need to start working earlier because my spouse needs to be able to work and we have to share child custody, right? So I think, and of course, I'm like, things that we don't think about when we were all going into the office, right? And it's 9 to 5 and we're commuting, right? None of those issues were there. So yeah, I agree with Colm. Right, tools are huge. We're also a Slack customer, and it's become right the go-to for communication. Everything is a channel. Everything is there, and then we're making sure that we communicate and collaborate that way, because at the end of the day, we're all at home and we can't make those decisions together when we were in the office before.
Now, I do want to come back to the technology. I don't think we should ignore that entirely, but for a moment, let's back up. Let's zoom out and talk about the role of DevOps in general. How does DevOps need to evolve and expand to adapt to the sort of uncertainty of the wheres and the whos that we're going into?
So I think, so when we talk about DevOps, the thing that I generally come to most frequently, and I think we've done quite well in getting 21 minutes into a webinar without having a what is DevOps discussion, is these feedback loops. So the effect of doing something, excuse me, and then seeing if the outcome was a good one. That for me is like one of the major things there, and I think what we're seeing here is maybe a drop off in things that were routine, maybe team stand-ups, still done over Zoom or Slack or whatever, Teams, etc., and those sort of things being done together in tandem with people working different hours, being done more asynchronously, and having the tools to support that way of working is even more vital than ever. One of the things that was occurring to me from the previous question is is that one of the adjustments that companies have had to make is to actually now be consciously thinking about communications rather than just, oh, there's an office and oh, the right people kind of get together at the right times. You've got to have the collaboration tools to do that for you, be they voice or be they chat, or be they things like ticketing systems or wikis. And you drill that down further to things like your CI pipeline. What outputs are you getting out of that? Your environmental monitoring. If those sort of things have been relying previously on somebody noticing something and then like calling out across the office, it's like, hey, Alice, that thing you just put into production is like gone, gone down or whatever. You've got to formalize that stuff now. And I've seen a lot of accelerations of projects that do things like giving single panes of glass visibility across not only testing environments, but going all the way up into staging production, and making that information kind of consumable if you want it. Again, it's been another big change in the way that comms are done. People are starting to over communicate and finding that given that everyone's remote, you now have to over communicate because you're losing nuance, you're losing that kind of herd wisdom that people have. And so actually stating things more often than maybe you thought they needed to be stated is beneficial. Same thing coming out of the tools, I'm finding. You have Slack bots that put things into channels rather than into people's emails. And so generally more use of tools, more over communication of things, not to drown everyone out with stuff, but just to give people a level of detail that they maybe won't pick up on when you're sat in the corner of your bedroom with just a single laptop screen.
Colm, Martin?
No, go on. I went first last time.
So being very English about this, after you.
So polite, you guys. I appreciate that.
Agree. I agree. I think that my team has always been collaborative and accepting of the tools that needed. But I think, yeah, there is a larger amount of over communication within the organization as a whole. I mean, for example, right? I think we used to do quarterly meetings as a company. We're doing weekly meetings as a company now. We do a stand-up, right? 750 people around the world getting on a weekly meeting with the CEO and the executive team, just kind of giving us the state of the business and what we're doing and how we're adjusting, right? We're already started talking about, at least in the States, right, some semblance of opening our offices, right, and how that's going to impact our teams as well, and obviously all the regulations around it. But for DevOps, I mean, I think as a process, DevOps has always been about, right, collaboration and working with development and being together. So I think they're not going to be that much changes besides the fact of right now learning how to do it, right, I think from home or from different tools at times.
Yeah, I think stuff it's much of the same that's been said is just being tighter on process, but not process for process's sake, but just like being clearer, stuff like run books and that kind of stuff. Like I'm one of Slack's incident response team, and the kind of incidents like as before is like we were previously quite good about doing things in Slack, but it's just kind of dial all this kind of stuff up to 9 and being like super explicit about what's happening. Like in our physical offices, we used to have rooms that were set aside for incidents. So it's like an incident commander can just take this room off you, regardless of what the meeting booking tool says. Like an incident manager can just grab this. We just can't do that anymore. So like for 99% of our incidents, we just do it all in a Slack channel. But there's that 1% where the incident itself is that, you can't use Slack channels. And like we're having to do stuff, fall back to video conferencing and stuff like that. And it's exposing a lot of cracks in our processes that, weren't obvious in the past. You know what I mean? Like simple stuff, like when there's 40 people in a video conference, like first of all, that's chaos. But second of all, like really simple stuff, like who's the incident commander? Because when you're in a meeting room, it's just like Colum's the incident commander today. Whereas now it's hard to do, and we're having to think about like this goofy stuff, like running scripts to automatically update our display names in video conferencing. Again, it's all just goofy stuff you just wouldn't have thought of in 6 months ago.
I like to think of the all the cellular phones with Face ID as being something you wouldn't have thought of 6 months ago. Now your your Face ID is, whew. But this sort of brings me to a tangential point. We've talked a lot about the people and some of the tools that they've used, but when you are connecting these people, the teams themselves, and the tools that they're using, right? How important, and let's start with Martin this time. So I'm going to actually call it so that we don't, because you guys are so polite. You're so polite. I'm so impressed with your manners. But let's start with Martin and talk about when connecting the people, the teams, the tools, right? How important is a single source of truth, or does it matter?
Oh, great question. We're all about collaboration at SmartBear, right? So with some of our tools and some of our products are about collaboration. So, for example, Swagger Hub, it was built on the Open API spec, right, for developers to document and build their APIs, right? So I have to say we're a huge believer, and the tools are very, very important. It just makes the most sense. We have other products around the same, right? BDD. Big in the industry now. We have products around that, and then they're all about how you collaborate and do BDD together. So yeah, so I think that the products and the tools that we use are going to drive and help us improve that.
I mean, I think it would be remiss of me to not suggest that collaboration is important given where I work, but I think you have to have a single source of truth, and I don't say that in like you have to only use Slack for things. I mean, a single source of truth can be your Jira instance, but it needs to cross-populate to where all of your collaboration is happening. So like generally the way we talk about Slack is like Slack is I mean, for sure it's a tool, but it's more a hub. And like part of the reason that we've always had a very open API is like we're not naive enough to think that you do literally all of your work in Slack. Of course, software engineers use Jira, and salespeople use Salesforce, and marketing people use whatever marketing people use. And we want to integrate with we want to integrate with all of them because we kind of want to be the common glue that pulls all of your different disparate teams together. And people who are developing against our platform can integrate in whatever way makes sense for their product. But if you don't have if you don't have a place where people can follow along, then it's all chaos. Like the Salesforce integration with Slack, salespeople are used to operating in Salesforce, and it's a tool that's optimized for their needs. But I'm in the product and engineering side of Slack, and I don't open Salesforce, but the Salesforce integration allows me to pull information. So if I'm hopping on a call with a customer or debugging something for a customer, I can go pull information about them if I need to. And the salesperson has done their work in Salesforce where they need to do it, but I've been able to use Slack to go get that information. I think the other thing we do quite deliberately internally at Slack is all of our channels are public unless they have a good reason not to be. Because the kind of wisdom of the crowd and the access to information, when you kind of, I suppose, democratize that access to information, then you'll never, people will make connections that you would never have imagined. And so we think that's really important.
Yeah, I'd endorse that wholeheartedly. Absolutely. Yeah, it's you can have multiple single sources of truth, but if you've got no point of coordination between them all, then it's almost moot. And in fact, it's just just while Colin was speaking, I'm thinking of silos of information. Salesforce could be a silo, HubSpot could be a silo, Jira could be a silo, etc. And in this current wave of the tools that's obviously been so massively accelerated by the pandemic, making the most of the integrations between those is how you get those little pockets of innovation and the spark that you need when you put these things next to each other in an accessible way. So yeah, again, coming back to when we were talking about over communicating, Colin's point around having information being a democracy, and having, if you're talking about salaries for a new hire, then you want to keep that sort of stuff private, but almost everything else, put it out there. Trust your people, to not waste their time reading every single Slack channel or every single link off to Salesforce and read every single Jira ticket. That's how you get people collaborating effectively, by operating on the edges of their silos. The fact that we're now being forced to think about how to structure that information because it's not so readily available because you go and talk to someone in the office, I think it's only a good thing.
Perfect.
I was just gonna say we don't leave new hires, to fend for themselves or anything, but we certainly tell new hires it's like, if you've got a question, there's a search bar right at the top of Slack. Type it in there. Someone has probably answered it, and because we have a huge amount of our content as a public channel, it's all in there, and people will usually find the answer they need pretty quickly.
Nice. So we have some fantastic questions coming in from the audience, but I've got one more that I want to put to you guys, starting with Colm this time, and then we're going to take some audience questions, which I'm very excited about. But before we do that, Colm, people are using tools like Zoom, Teams, and Slack, okay, to collaborate. So are there others that specifically help DevOps teams in this climate? What tools would you recommend that we haven't gotten to yet?
I mean, if you're an AWS shop, there's a bunch of look. Obviously, I'm going to bias to everything that has a really good Slack integration. As
are we.
AWS has a pretty tight Slack integration now. They have chatbots that can run scripts and all sorts of fun stuff like that. Then there's the usual suspects like Jira, and a decent Atlassian integration. I'm going to cheat a little. It's not quite specific to DevOps, but people shouldn't underestimate the fun or social tools, like stuff like Donut, which is like I'm going to undersell Donut here, but essentially pairs people in your organization to go have coffee together. I mean, that was the original idea. Obviously, they're not getting coffee together at the moment, but they're just pairing for a 30-minute Zoom chat. Seems kind of jokey and frivolous, but is incredibly important. And you could scope that to just inside of your team for knowledge sharing and stuff. GitHub has a bunch of really good integrations in terms of reminders about pull requests and all that kind of stuff. And basically anything that kind of automates the way the busy work, I suppose, is the best way I can describe it, is going to be a win. People whatever. No one hates busy work. Engineers hate it particularly. So anything that solves that is going to be a win.
Martin, what do you think?
Agreed. As far as tools, we're big Jira, Slack shop as well, and Office 365's got a bunch of things, right? That is like a virtual whiteboard that we started using, but like the Trello boards and the Miro, we actually had an offsite product and development engineering, and it was all on Zoom. And then from that offsite, we actually had to break up in groups and go collaborate, and we found the Miro and Trello to be extremely useful for us, for people to just put ideas up on sticky notes. So it's almost like you're in an office working with a whiteboard, but you're all remote. So yeah, that's what.
Nice. And Mr. Saunders?
Yeah, so I get the benefit of going third here this time, which means I can piggyback quite nicely on both of those answers. But I want to pull out a couple of things, which are that, so just generally in a DevOps world, I'm encouraging people to use the right tool that's specifically good. It's for that function, kind of the old Unix philosophy of pick a tool that does one thing and does it well. These days, I would say that it's just as important that tool integrates well with others, either through automating things, through the whole design, build, operate lifecycle, or even just through communication, through Slack, through Teams, etc. So I'm finding latterly it's mattering less which actual tools you use, as long as they communicate well. It's almost like the tools are falling into the same boat as employees. Doesn't matter if an employee does group work if it doesn't communicate, or he or she doesn't communicate effectively. It's the same thing with the tools. And yeah, coming on to what Martin was saying around, yeah, one of the last bastions around of Agile and DevOps that's been resisting conversion to partially remote or fully remote teams has been that good old-fashioned whiteboard, the sticky notes. And for a long time, I've heard that used, and used it myself, in fact, as an argument for going to the office, so we can collaborate in front of a board. And yeah, Mural, Miro, Trello, those sort of things are really coming into their own these days. It's a movement that was already happening, but similarly to like the hockey stick growth that tools like Slack and Zoom have, very much in the public eye of growing massively. The things that do more nuanced collaboration, like those tools I just mentioned, I think are becoming even more indispensable.
Great, thank you. All right, guys, so that's it for my questions, but we have got some fantastic ones from the audience. And thank you, audience, for keeping those questions coming. Please don't hesitate to keep them going. We're going to try and do our best to hit them all, but we might not. So I'd like to start with a question from Olpado Olaide, and please forgive me if I butchered your name there, Olpado. Olpado says, I am just started training on DevOps. What's the best way to go about it to nail it down? Matt, you want to start?
Yeah, okay. So this is a little tricky because DevOps means a lot of different things. But I would probably segment your learning into maybe looking if you want to go down the technical route or a more collaborative route. I have a lot of conversations where I say DevOps is not just about the tools, and all these horrible vendors who have just made it about selling lots of tools are terrible. But the reality is that the industry has moved on massively thanks to that. And so if you're looking at tools, then I think it's the best thing to start with is get a full understanding of how software gets delivered. So some developers write some code, some testers write some tests, and then it's the bit after that, which is where all the interesting stuff is. So it's about learning how the different bits. So for example, cloud hosting, AWS, GCP, Microsoft, Azure, how those things interact together with things like CI systems, Jenkins, Bamboo, GitLab, etc., with hosting repos, configuration as code. So learning that as a concept where you're not just typing commands into a server to make it do things, but you're writing code that does it for you. Those are the sort of thing I would look at starting at. In this day and age, easier because there are so many online resources that we can be using for this. Companies, I won't go down mentioning a whole load of them, but you can pick up training on these things. But the one thing that I would say to anybody new, in fact, and I do, some of the people I mentor when they're getting started in this, is to not get too fixated by the tools. It's like understand the world that you're living in and understand how the tools are there to stop you doing a load of heavy lifting. Great that you can go off and get an encyclopedic knowledge of how Jenkins, for example, works. You can add more value to an organization by understanding how that fits into the bigger picture. Because ultimately what we're here to do is get good software developed, deployed, operated quickly, efficiently, carefully, and safely. So yeah, tools great, process, keep an eye on that as well.
Martin, Colm, anything to add to that?
Agreed. It's all about the process. It's all right, bringing value to the business and to the company. It's not really so much about how specifically you're doing it, right? Whether you're a GitLab or a GitHub or a Bitbucket company, that's all just about how you're going to get your code out to the market so you can deliver value to your customers. So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I think like Matt says, the problem with learning DevOps is that it means something. I mean, even within a company, it means different things to different people. I would suggest, I mean, two things. One, because it's so variable, look at the companies you admire, you know what I mean? Like, look at the companies you think like they do it really well and look at them, and then try and look at them almost in a grid and find the common things, because like Martin says, some companies are going to use GitHub, some people are going to like self-host their Git repositories or whatever. They're all going to use slightly different tooling. So what you're looking for is the common themes and the processes. And then the other thing I would do, and just because I'm a learn by doing type of person, is like, even if you build like a goofy hello world type thing, just try and get it like from your laptop to a production system and just figure out all the kinks. Doesn't matter, to Matt's point, whether you use Jenkins or GitHub Actions or whatever. Just doing the whole thing end to end. It doesn't have to be a complex piece of software, but just to kind of figure it out and get a sense for how the different things work. Because the processes scale out. You know what I mean? They don't matter. It's the tools that are usually the bottleneck.
I exist in a completely different world than you guys, but I really do believe in taking something from the seed to growing it. And so all good stuff, seeing the process, seeing how the sausage gets made, even if you don't like sausage. Next, and thank you so much for that question, really great one. And let's start this next one with Colm. And this comes from Olufemi Sonuga, and please forgive me if I messed up your name. Let's start with Colm. Why is the industry more focused on DevOps instead of biz DevOps, which includes security? A little scandal in today's webinar.
Oh wow. I don't. Since security was called out, I don't know that any company who I would particularly admire in the field of DevOps thinks of security as an afterthought. I really hope they don't. I mean, security incidents are the most terrifying. Like, security incidents by definition are are the highest priority incidents at, I mean, pretty much any company I've ever worked at. My old boss in my last job, he used to say, everything else can wait. If there's a security incident, literally nothing else matters. I think you're kind of kidding yourself if you're, a practitioner who says like a security can come afterwards. You know what I mean? Martin said it in the last question, like DevOps as a whole isn't a particular software development methodology or anything like that. It's at the end of the day, it's about developing value for the business, whether that's a business in the sense that Adaptavist is, or it's a business or it's a project in the sense of like a large scale open source project. It's all about how you deliver value, and if you're not delivering value in the sense of security, then you're not truly delivering value. That's the best skirting I can give.
Hey, you skirted that one beautifully, Colm. Very nice. Martin, what do you think?
Yes, if you're not thinking about security in everything that you're doing today, you're doing something wrong, in my personal opinion. I tell my team all the time, whatever you do, the first thing you need to do is think about it securely and how to make sure that we keep our company's names out of the papers. So yeah, I think DevOps and DevSecOps or BizOps, whatever. At the end of the day, they're just terms that I think most companies are doing today. We can't deliver software without making sure that it's secure. It would be a disservice to our company and to our customers.
All right. Oh, Matt, go ahead.
So yeah, I just want to build on that. I think the name is unfortunate. I mean, we look at DevOps, and do we add things on the front of it? Do we add things on the back of it? Do we make it Dev, Sec, Biz, Marketing, etc., Ops, or Sales? And there is a temptation to do that. But the reality is, we should have been doing that all along. I think the term is possibly well defined in that. It's a cycle between developers and operations who are actually implementing all these things that are needed for security and for the business, etc. And it's only because those people are actually doing it that the name is as it is. But yes, the problem I have with all these multiple definitions is that it tends to exclude the fact that DevOps is fundamentally a business process. And all these things are implicit in it, which is that you are delivering value, you're writing secure software, and people forget, which is why movements like DevSecOps start to take effect. It's not because we weren't doing them, or maybe we weren't doing them, but because actually we need to just shine the light on them a bit more to make sure they get fully encompassed in whatever we're doing in DevOps.
All right. Great. So security should be part of the thing. Doesn't need to extend the name of DevOps in order for security to be consideration. Because we could get a lot of initials in there.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I don't think so. I think that the process, the DevOps as a whole, it just includes that, right? So yeah, I can have the tools. I can put it. I can shift left, put security in front of it before you deliver it out, right? But is okay. So my team is running the security scans. My team is running the tools that need to do. But the process, there has to be a process after that, right? Because at the end of the day, right, we scan the code. It's buggy. Great, it's got a security issue. Someone go fix it, right? So, yeah, I think it's all about the process.
All right, so we've now we've started with when you're just learning. We've gotten into a little bit more mature. Let's back up a pinch to the new DevOps person. And how can a software developer? This question comes from Ahmad Al-Sahan. Thank you so much, Ahmad. The question is, how can a software developer practice and test with infrastructure work and upgrade or update cloud solutions with minimum failures, especially in production environments? Which that already says to me, don't, but you guys are the experts. So Martin, do you want to start us off on this one?
Sure. Great question. So it's all about the tools. It's all about it's how you do it, right? So that's a lot about how to make the sausage, in my personal opinion. So you have to have your test cases, right? You have to have your tools alerting or catching the issues that you they may find, and you need to know when to stop the process before either going live. So I think that there's probably developers could answer this a little bit better than I can, but at the end of the day, I think that if you build your pipeline correctly, you should be able to avoid those things.
I think Matt skimmed on part of it earlier as well, as he talked about, your infra there should be as much automating and, the phrase is escaping me at the moment, but, you should have a lot of chef cookbooks, and all of your infrastructure is code. A lot of your infrastructure be code. My background is software engineering, and whenever I've worked with very talented infrastructure people, I don't necessarily understand their world, but they made it easy for me by just presenting it all as code that I can do. And this is, again, I think to something Matt said earlier, is this is very different than it was 10 years ago with the rise of AWS and Azure and GCP and stuff like that. And so these are all kind of just they're not long-term infrastructure investments, infrastructure in the kind of financing, financial sense. The government infrastructure engineer I used to work with, he always used to describe to me as servers are cattle, they're not pets. So you shouldn't learn to love your servers. You should be spinning up and destroying servers all day, every day, and you shouldn't need to care. And the way he helped me do that was by creating really robust infrastructure coding, so that I could just run scripts to provision, if I needed a fleet of 20 servers, I could just run a command and it was done. And I never needed to open, we were an AWS shop, I never needed to open the AWS console, not even once. I don't even think I had access to it. So that's certainly how I just tried to think of infrastructure as just another piece of code. And I let the true infrastructure professionals worry about the nuances and build the tooling that I can then abuse relentlessly.
So I was going to give a similarly psychopathic answer, to be honest, which is that so the question, I can't remember the exact phrasing, apology, but it was something like how do we not fail in production? And the answer to that is to make everything look like production, so that you can go and beat it up with a stick and break it and abuse it. And see how it fails, because you then know that the way that you did that on your non-production system is exactly the same as the production system. And the critical thing for me is being able to spin up environments that are just like production, so that you can go and see how something behaves in a secure sandbox. because it's not production, but it's exactly the same as production. One of my old bosses, a guy called Ben Wooten, who founded Contino, the DevOps consultancy, wrote a blog post which I still think is chronically undercited here on the importance of being able to spin up these environments. So, like being able to spin up an environment. Say you've got a multi-tier web app and it's got a database, and your production's got 1 million records in it, but your test database has only got 5 records in it. That's not like production. You need to be able to spin it up with 1 million records, and the only way you can do that is by leveraging these techniques and some of the tools. And this is hard. The things that Colin and Martin have already mentioned, to be able to spin those things up. So you have to have configuration as code. You have to do it automatically. That's why there's such a big focus on doing that. It's not just so, hey, we can just spin this stuff up. The real world answer to that is that being able to do that lets you test more and lets you innovate. So yeah, that's it really. Environments like production make your test environments like production, so you can take hold of them. You can get a feel of them, understand what they're going to work. You want to try something, you're not sure if something's going to work in production, well, you do it in your test environment and you do know it's going to work in production because they're exactly the same. That's the critical thing for me on that, to build on the other answers.
The one last thing I'd add as well is that over the last year or so at Slack, we spent a lot of time thinking about failure states and ways to improve resilience in our architecture. And a lot of it was the early things were a lot of tabletop exercises, just like, so we're primarily in US East, and it's like, what happens if US East goes down? Like, what happens? And we figured out what the state was today, and then we figured out where we wanted to get to, and when we mapped out how many steps we could get, and you eventually get to a point where like Netflix are very famous proponents of this, of like just turning off regions for lols to see what happens, and being resilient to that. And it's all about a balance between, like, you want resilient infrastructure, but you obviously don't want to have like excess capacity, because then you're just handing money over to whoever your cloud provider is for no good reason. But all of those exercises over the last year, like when all the COVID stuff started happening and all of our graphs started going up to the right, a lot of our larger customers started asking, like, what's our I can't remember the phrase they used, but like basically, what's your backup plan? And we were like, well, it's actually all fine. Like we didn't have any scaling issues because our automation kicked in and it just provisioned however many more EC2 instances it needed, however many more DB shards, whatever. It all just provisioned and it all kicked in automatically. And even though we weren't preparing for, such a massive spike in traffic, the fact that we'd done it meant we were in pretty good stead.
Yeah, it reminds me of, we always used to say the last test is when you go into production, right? You test your code. It's funny, we have so many different products here. Some of them, right, we have like Matt said, we have staging and test environments that are production-like, and we have one product actually that does not have any staging or dev environments. They commit all their code to master and it goes into production, right? Because their test cases are there and they trust their automation. They spend more time building test cases to make sure that what they're going to put into production works sometimes than actual piece of code that went into prod. So yeah, I mean, we have the same thing. We worry about making sure that we can test things correctly, and we have some tools to do that, even internal tools, right, and products that we sell. But at the end of the day, I always say the last test is when you go to prod.
That's a good slogan. Or that's a good catchphrase. I like it. All right, guys, we're running out of time. So what I'm going to do is give you each 1 minute to talk about the last question. Okay, I'm going to time you. I don't mean to be rude, but I'm going to give you each 1 minute so we can still get out of here exactly on time. All right. The question comes from Zishan Hassan, and thank you so much, Zishan. We're going to give our 3 panelists 1 minute to discuss your question. Hi. You talked about the current working situation and flexibility. What do you think how the future working environment will be like? Will it be the same as before, or will it change, and how? Let's start with Martin. Your minute begins now.
Sure. It's definitely going to change. I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we didn't realize that. I mean, we were a lot of offices. We have some teams that never work from home. Our work from home policy was actually very informal in some teams. I think it's going to become formal and more of a standard. I've got individuals that are excelling and exceeding my expectations at working from home. They're doing better. I hope it's not because they're just working longer hours. But then I have other individuals that are not, right? And it's just, right, it's tough to be in that environment. So I think it'll be a little bit of a mixture of both. I think as a business, it just makes sense. Our candidate pool for us at least would expand, right? If I can have remote teams and people working from home, I can look at people that may be out of state, right? Whereas in the past I didn't. So yeah.
Nice. Under a minute, sir.
We'll see. We'll see how the world ends up after all this.
Right on. Colm, your minute begins now.
I think, like Martin said, I don't think there's any going back. I think there'll probably be an equalization, like a leveling off. I think basically the way it's going to work is there are going to be people who either are fully remote, and that's fine, and that's their choice. But then there are some people who are going to be like basically anchored to an office, and they have the option to go into an office, maybe 1 day a week, 2 days a week. Because the reality is a lot of people's home situations just don't enable 100% remote work, and whether you have family commitments or whether you just physically don't have the space. I'm curious to see what'll happen, when we go back to normal. I said to some of the panelists before we began, is like, I understand how fully remote companies work, like we basically all are right now. I understand how fully office-based companies work. It's the bit in the middle that I've always found hard to get my head around. So I'm curious to see when we go back, given everyone will have so much extra experience. And then the only other thing I'll add, and it's something I've heard said a lot, is like, we're not working remotely right now. We're sheltering in place during a global pandemic. It is a very different environment. So when all of these orders lift and stuff, then it'll be the real test of how both our industry and just the global workforce in general has adapted.
Thank you, Colm. Excellent. Matt Saunders, let's hear what you got to say.
Yep, totally endorse everything that's just already been said. So I'll give it a slightly different angle, which is that I think the difference, there's going to be two different ways that this is going to unfold, depending on the sort of organization that you're working for. I think, and I've spoken to a lot of people who work in what I class like command and control organizations, where people maybe by default didn't have as much autonomy and didn't have the flexibility to work from home, etc. Who can't wait to get back to the get back to the old way of doing things. And I think there's a contrast between those sort of organizations and those that maybe grant more autonomy, more what I would call more progressive organizations, where people are empowered to do the right work, and actually this has been good for them. I think the first class of organization has maybe struggled and is maybe treading water a bit more, as Colin was talking about, just waiting for things to get back to some sort of normal. Whereas the second class, is, to an extent, is if not thriving, then doing all right with it. And so, yeah, when it gets back to when we all go back to the offices or have the option to do so.
I think I didn't do that to Matt. I didn't stop Matt, even though I did give him a minute. But I want to be wary of everyone's time, and we are at time for today's webinar. So Martin Lowinger, Colm Doyle, Matt Saunders, thank you so much for taking the time to discuss DevOps in this new crazy world and sharing some of your experience and best practices. It's been wonderful speaking with you. I really have enjoyed hearing your insights and learning from you. So thank you so much. To our audience, thank you so much for listening. And if Adaptavist can help you with anything, we are here for you, as is SmartBear and Slack. So for the panelists and myself, I thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Stay safe out there. Cheers.